So our current funders for the pilot program that we've actually just finished our first pilot and now we're expanding within the Chicago region. And those funders are FEMA, the Army Corps of Engineers, EPA, the City of Chicago, Cook County, and IDNR, as well as several charitable foundations. So for those of you who this isn't your daily then rudder and what you're thinking about all the time, you might not know that there's many ways that water, too much rainwater, during periods of heavy rain can enter a property. So there's the way that is perhaps more traditionally thought of when you think of flooding, and that's a river or creek overbanking. So that might be water being drained from parking lots and too much impervious surfaces. It makes its way into a creek. The creek then goes to a low-lying area when the creek overbanks. And that water will then go over land and enter a property, either through the window wells or through the doors. The second way that water can enter a property is very just localized inundation. That's just water pooling, too much of it then makes its way over land into a property, and again it might enter through a window well or through a door. The third way that water can enter is as a seepage. It seeps through the land. I'm not sure if I can point now, I can't point to the screen. But two of the arrows we have shows water entering the property through foundation cracks that would either be, for example, on a basement wall or on the basement floor. And then the last way that water can enter a property is through sewer backup. So the bad news for mayors and managers is that our research suggests that your flood risk maps, particularly those prepared by FEMA, could well be wrong, inaccurate. They could be completely wrong and very misleading. The second bit of bad news is that you might well not have the services and the programs in place to help you alleviate that flooding. And the third thing is that those people, many of whom you won't know about because your flood risk maps are inaccurate, are probably paying a huge price for flooding right now. And the good news is that, and so I'm sort of pushing the point here, but by and large, this isn't a technical problem. We essentially know how to manage stormwater and have done for centuries. It's not really even, I'd go so far as to say, a financing problem. We understand the financing systems, things like stormwater fees, a very smart way of managing and funding stormwater infrastructure. So I'd really say that this is a social and political problem. And the good news about that is that your flood victims are your greatest allies, that your flood victims are a way that you can get the public mandate for action. The second bit of good news is that while your FEMA, for example, flood risk maps are inaccurate, there are other ways that you can get the information that you might need, and I'll talk you through some of the ways that we've done that. And that the services that you need are currently being designed by programs like Rain Ready. So I'm going to now go through a little bit more detail about how we came to these conclusions. So when we started this program about 3-4 years ago, we produced a report called The Prevalence and Cost of Urban Flooding. And we did something that had never been done before. We managed to get hold of private insurance flood damage payout. So this is actually typically called a sewer rider. It's an additional homeowner's insurance policy that's connected to the home insurance. You have to pay for it to take it out. And we got hold of the claims data for that. And then we managed to also get claims data from the national NFIP, the National Insurance Program, and also from Federal Disaster Relief and SBA loans. We aggregated up that information, and we got really, for the first time ever, a real understanding of where flood damage payouts were actually being made versus modelled understanding of risk. And what we found was actually fairly astonishing. So you'll see this map here. What you'll see is the lower shade, the whiter shades of colour, and particularly those with the red around them and the zip codes marked. So this is the area of Cook County in Illinois. It's 5 years of flood damage payouts. Those with the red around them are the highest damage payout zip codes. If you look around those further outside into the suburbs of Cook County, you'll see those are little blue dots. That's where FEMA currently says the risk is. So what you can see is that those zip codes with the highest flood damage payouts, i.e. those with the red around them, have no floodplain in them whatsoever. In fact, we found no correlation at all with floodplains and flood risk. But what we did find a correlation with was low-income communities. So the whiter the colour, the lower income the communities, the darker the colour, the higher income communities. So this map suggests that those disadvantaged communities are most vulnerable and they're hidden. So many people don't actually even know that they're flooding. And in many cases, they're not affected by street flooding, they're being affected by water directly entering into the basement, i.e. it's not visible. So when we did that survey, it got a lot of attention because nobody had ever been able to show this. Although I think FEMA has sometimes had some instinct that this might be the case, it was the first time we could show it. So we then promoted a piece of legislation called the Urban Flooding Awareness Act in the state of Illinois. And that required the state to do the same survey that we had done, but right across the state. And they managed to actually require insurance companies to release this data, so they got a much bigger data set than we did. And what they found was that 92% of flood damage payouts lie outside the floodplain. In fact, you're slightly more likely to flood, just marginally more likely to flood if you're outside the floodplain than if you're within it. And these people are really paying the price of flooding. It's a chronic problem. So we found in this research that we did that flood damage payouts were across 97% of Cook County zip codes across all 5 years that we were measuring. Flood damage payouts averaged at around $5,000, but many went up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. We then did our own survey of property owners affected by flooding and asked them some questions about how they were being impacted. We found that 70% of these flood victims had said that they were affected by flooding 3 or more times within a 5-year period. So they were chronic, repetitive flood victims. We found that 76% of those people who responded to our survey had invested in solutions to try and mitigate the problem, but only 6% felt that they had actually tackled the problem. And we found that the impacts it was having on their lives were appalling in many places. So terrible damage to their property, foundation cracks, mold, raw sewage, stress in health, loss of manuals, 42% lost use of their home, and foreclosures. And so one particular story I remember, we had an engineer who'd been working with CNT for 30 years, and he was fairly hardened to these flood victim stories. But once he came back, having interviewed a flood victim, and he was kind of white, and he said that this woman who had been repeatedly flooded so many times, and she was completely stuck because she could no longer afford to repair the home. The insurance companies had dropped her. She couldn't sell her home, and her son was now getting these chronic asthma attacks as a result of the mold and the property. And Many of you will have seen scenes like this. I went down with a camera on a day where it was fairly mild flooding event, fairly mild in terms of heavy rains, but it was having this kind of impact on the community of Midlothian where we were working. And this was someone's backyard. I visited one person, they were just having a wedding celebration in a backyard like that on the day that it had rained. I think there we are. This was someone's garage, again on the same day. Just waiting for it to turn. Okay, so here's an illustration of the extent to which businesses are affected. This is State Farm underwater. And here's Permaseal, they're our largest company in the region who help property owners protect their own property through waterproofing, and here they are with their own properties underwater. Here's a typical illustration of a more internal flooding that might happen with combined sewer overflows, such as we have in Chicago. This is someone who sent in their photo. He was a tenant in this garden basement, and this was his home. And this is just a photo really illustrative of the kind of impacts that it's having on people. If people, particularly low-income people who are already under such strain, dealing with these situations where you're literally getting raw sewage fountains coming out of the toilets. In this case, the person just couldn't manage it and abandoned the property. This is the home of Dana, who's someone who I started to correspond with. She lived in Glenview. She's been trying to sell her property over several years, and because she's been honest about the flooding affecting it, she's been unable to do so. This is the home of someone called Helen Lekovich in the community in Midlothian where we're working. She's got together with over 100 of her neighbours who are affected by chronic flooding such as this. And this is the home of Tim in Crestwood. This was flooding in 2013, and he actually abandoned his property and had a breakdown soon after as a result of the flooding affecting him. So one of the problems that I said was that that many cities lack the services that they need to tackle the problem. And that's because we tend to be over-reliant on expanding the pipes that take the stormwater and expanding the storage capacity. And while both of those are important parts in a suite of tools that are needed for managing stormwater, there's an over-reliance on those strategies, and they're incredibly expensive. They can take decades to deliver. And they really lack the flexibility that's needed for these different types of flooding that are occurring. Each way water enters a property requires a slightly different solution. And that flooding could be occurring within the property, i.e. it's the water from the property that's flooding itself. I.e. homeowners are just literally flooding themselves. There are other times when it's neighbourhood water flooding them, and there are other times when it's watershed rainwater flooding them. Each requires a different strategy. Then there's flooding on private property, there's flooding on public property. Again, different strategies are needed. And there is the stormwater from private property and public property that is contributing. So there's this need for a greater set of flexibility. And there's also a sort of over-dependence on strategies that aren't necessarily the most sustainable. So we developed this hierarchy for managing stormwater where we first talk about just avoiding it by, for example, introducing ordinances that limit the expansion of impervious surfaces. And then the next thing down would be to sink it where it falls through the use, for example, of porous paving, trees, rain gardens, and then create temporary storage basins, for example, on golf courses, football pitches, where you can just temporarily hold that water and then release it slowly. And then only then actually send the water off into a neighbouring community, some sort of storage facility. So that's the bad news. And the good news, as I mentioned, is that the flood victims, these are people who are being impacted right now as a result of flooding, and they can be your strongest allies. So this is Helen Lekovich with her neighbour. I showed you a picture of the flooding affecting her and her neighbours. And she's actually holding the microphone, and they're doing media interviews for the local press. We hosted these events, what we call the gross gatherings, to talk about the grossness of flooding. And here residents are telling their stories, which we then filmed and got them to write up on chalkboards. We've encouraged them to participate in parades, which we find they have a natural inclination and desire to do. Just waiting for this slide to go over. We host events such as this one, where we've managed to literally get hundreds of residents together to start to talk about the flooding in their neighbourhood. We find that they intuitively want to document the problems, they want to take photos of them, share them with their neighbours, and so we help them do that. We use their own insight of the neighbourhood problems to actually map out incidents. And then, as I mentioned, there are other ways that you can get this information about who is affected. So in this case, we're just using the survey data. We're doing property surveys. This is a map of the public works official who's dealing with many of the complaints in this community of Midlothian, and he's just mapped out the problems as he understands them in the field. This is a map of elevation data, which helps us understand elevation levels and topography. Here's one of the historical aerial photos, so we get an understanding of how the watershed has developed and how that development might impact. And here's a watershed photo to understand the flows of water. And these kind of maps are really helpful for example, residents like Midlothian, to show that not only are they on the receiving end of other people's water, but they're also contributing to communities downstream. And then just the good old-fashioned participatory events where we ask people to tell their stories and write their aspirations on chalkboards like this. And then there are the services that we have started to develop, and I know that there are other people, other organisations like ours. So really home is actually modelled off home energy retrofitting, for those of you who know it. It's a one-stop shop in the sense that we go to a property owner, we do an assessment of their property, we then coordinate contractors to help implement our recommendations. And we're going to start to look at how we then actually help coordinate the financing for these homeowners. And we look at a mix of potential solutions. They might be plumbing, landscaping, or building solutions. This is a backwater valve that one of our very home team assessors was demonstrating. We will help them disconnect downspouts. Put that water into a dry well like this. Measures such as French drains. Often when water is going down the side of the house and seeping through, it's just a matter of regrading that land and then taking the water away in a French drain. to, for example, a rain garden like this. Just waiting for this time lag again. And then we'll also inspect the drains, the private property lateral pipes to look at whether or not there's any clogging. We'll take a camera down and actually inspect them. And we produce an assessment report like this. And here's a homeowner, Laurie Burns, who had one of our first rain-ready home upgrades. She was suffering from cumulative damage of $17,000 worth. And for her home upgrade, which included a mixture of things, rerouting the downspout, putting in a rain garden, rerouting the gutters. It cost $5,000 to do that work, and she has not flooded since. We also have a rain-ready community service. We'll go in and assess a community, look at where the risk occurs, and then help them implement solutions. We go through a community planning process, and the kind of solutions we might look at are these kinds where we look at bioswales, the redesign of city centres like this to include complete streets, and again a series of bioswales. Bioswale like this again. And then more creative approaches, such as in this case a dog park, which also doubles up as a stormwater retention pond. And so we just finished our rain-ready community plan for the community of Midlothian. It's been incredibly successful. We have helped them get in approximately $10 million worth of funding to help implement the plan. It hasn't yet been set to be adopted next week by the village formally, but they've already started moving forward on most of our recommendations and have working groups that have been steered by the residents to help them implement these strategies. Then they include, for example, complete streets policies, which include stormwater retention, a redesign of Natalie Creek, where a lot of the overbanking is happening, to include stormwater improvements along with recreational trails. So just tips on what you can do in a community affected by flooding and needing to get the residents behind you to start to invest in solutions. My first tip would be to find a non-profit partner. Non-profit partners can do things that cities can't. They can really start to help do the kind of educational programs, the advocacy that is critical to getting residents behind you. And although that's kind of scary, in many ways to help build advocacy around residents, we find that residents that are well organised are more intelligent and more thoughtful about the mix of responsibilities and the mix of strategies and who needs to take ownership of those strategies. RainReady can help. So we have a website, rainready.org, which has a whole number of fact sheets and guidance documents and videos and photographs to help communities. And we're a fee for service program, so we're very interested in working with cities to help them. And then just, I mentioned an opportunity that I would really like to work with various cities on. So after our Urban Flooding Awareness Act that we introduced in Illinois with such success, Congressman Quigley and Senator Durbin heard about this, and they came and we convened a lot of the flood victims that we worked with and got them to tell their stories. And they then introduced a paragraph which got into the appropriations bill that now requires a national very much similar to the one that was done in the state of Illinois, so that we can get a better idea of how this kind of urban flooding is affecting cities across the US. Now, this kind of one paragraph within a huge bill can get lost, get forgotten, or can be taken very seriously by FEMA. And we think that one of the best ways for it to get taken very seriously is for us to partner with cities who might want to get hold of the kind of data that we've managed to get hold of from private insurance companies to really understand where risk is occurring. So we really want to start to work with some key cities to start to write to FEMA and say how excited we are by this study and how much we would welcome getting hold of this data, as well as the recommendations emerging from FEMA's study to improve the way you as cities are responding to these challenges and helping build wave resilience. So, do let me know if you're interested. Rainready.org is our website, and you can contact me, hvesting@cnt.org. That's hvesting@cnt.org. Thank you very much.